The gunshot split the silence of the Colorado evening, sending Aurora O'Malley diving behind the weathered counter of her father's general store. The year was 1876, and death had become an unwelcome visitor to the small town of Willow Creek. Her hands trembled as she reached for the Winchester rifle her father had insisted she keep beneath the counter. "I don't want your money," a gruff voice called from the doorway. "Just need some bandages and whiskey if you'd be so kind." Aurora peered cautiously over the counter. A man stood silhouetted against the dying light, one hand pressed against his side, dark patches spreading across his worn denim shirt. Blood. He staggered forward, and as his face caught the lamplight, she recognized him, Kieran Dawson, the mysterious cowboy who'd ridden into town last month. "Mr. Dawson," she said, rising slowly, rifle still gripped tightly in her hands. "That doesn't look like a gunfight you won." He managed a weak smile, tipping his hat with his free hand. "The other fellow looks worse, Miss O'Malley, I promise you that." Aurora hesitated only a moment before setting the rifle aside. Kieran Dawson had a reputation a gunslinger with a fast draw and a mysterious past. But in the 4 weeks he'd been in Willow Creek, he'd been nothing but polite to her, tipping his hat whenever their paths crossed, buying supplies with cash money and keeping to himself. "Sit down before you fall down, Mr. Dawson," she commanded, gesturing to a chair near the wood stove. "I'll fetch what you need." As she gathered bandages and her father's medicinal whiskey, Aurora stole glances at the wounded man. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "Were you shot?" she asked, bringing the supplies to where he sat, blood seeping through his fingers. "Grazed," he corrected, wincing as he removed his hand to reveal a jagged tear across his ribs. "Fellow had poor aim, thank the Lord." Aurora swallowed hard. She'd treated wounds before living in the Western Territories meant learning such skills, but the proximity to this particular man made her fingers clumsy. "I can do it myself, miss," Kieran offered, noting her hesitation. "Nonsense," she said, finding her resolve. "You can't see it properly." "Remove your shirt, Mr. Dawson." A fleeting smile crossed his lips before pain chased it away. "Never thought I'd hear those words from you, Miss O'Malley." Aurora felt heat rise to her cheeks. At 22, she was hardly innocent to the ways of men and women, but her father's protective nature and her own careful demeanor had kept her largely removed from such interactions. "Do not make me regret helping you, sir." With effort, Kieran shrugged out of his shirt, revealing a torso mapped with old scars. Aurora tried to maintain a professional demeanor as she cleaned his wound, but she couldn't help noticing the hard planes of muscle beneath her fingertips. "You've done this before," Kieran observed as she worked, his voice tight with pain. "My father taught me," she replied, "said a woman alone in these territories should know how to tend wounds as well as defend herself." Wise man, he was. The words slipped out softly, tinged with grief. Kieran caught her wrist gently. "Was?" Aurora nodded, continuing her work. "Fever took him last winter. It's just me now, running the store." Silence hung between them as she finished bandaging his side. When she was done, Kieran pulled his blood-stained shirt back on and rose carefully to his feet. "What do I owe you?" he asked, reaching for his money pouch. Aurora shook her head. "Consider it charity, Mr. Dawson." "I don't take charity, Miss O'Malley." Their eyes locked, stubborn pride meeting stubborn pride. "Then pay me by telling me who shot you," she countered. "I've a right to know if there's dangerous men about." Kieran's expression darkened. "Men from my past. Don't worry, they won't be bothering this town. I'll be moving on tonight." "In your condition, that's foolishness." "Staying would be the greater foolishness," he said, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. "Thank you, Miss O'Malley. You've shown me a kindness I won't forget." Before she could respond, he was gone, melting into the twilight like a shadow. Aurora stood in the empty store, the scent of blood and saddle leather lingering in the air, an inexplicable sense of loss washing over her. She didn't expect to see Kieran Dawson again. She was wrong. 3 days later, as Aurora was closing the store for the evening, a familiar silhouette appeared in the doorway. Mr. Dawson, she said, surprised. I thought you'd left town. I did. He removed his hat, revealing a face that had regained some color. Rode south for a spell, made sure those men were truly gone. Aurora nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at his return. And your wound? Healing well, thanks to your handiwork. He stepped further into the store, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. I've come to pay my debt properly. Before she could protest, he placed a small leather pouch on the counter. The unmistakable sound of coins clinked within it. That's not necessary, she began. It is to me, he interrupted gently. I pay what I owe, Miss O'Malley. Their fingers brushed as she reluctantly took the pouch, and Aurora felt a jolt of awareness travel up her arm. She quickly withdrew her hand, unnerved by her response to this virtual stranger. Will you be staying in Willow Creek now? She asked, busying herself with the ledger to avoid his penetrating gaze. For a time, he answered carefully. I've taken work at the Peterson Ranch. Aurora's eyebrows rose. Old man Peterson was notoriously difficult to work for. That's surprising. A smile tugged at Kieran's mouth. Mr. Peterson and I understand each other. Men who value hard work and few words tend to get along well enough. I see. She didn't, not really, but she nodded anyway. Well, I wish you luck there. Kieran settled his hat back on his head, tipping the brim slightly. Good evening, Miss O'Malley. She watched him go, a curious mixture of relief and disappointment swirling in her chest. Over the following weeks, Kieran became a regular customer at the general store. He never stayed long, but his visits grew more frequent. A pound of coffee one day, ammunition the next, horseshoe nails and bacon and matches. Small purchases that hardly warranted separate trips. Aurora found herself looking forward to these brief encounters, anticipating the jingle of his spurs and the quiet Miss O'Malley that accompanied each visit. They exchanged small talk about the weather, the price of grain, and local gossip, never venturing into personal territory, until the day Kieran arrived with a split lip and bruised knuckles. Good heavens, Aurora exclaimed when he entered the store. What happened to you? Kieran touched his swollen lip gingerly. Difference of opinion. With whom? A stampeding bull. She came around the counter, propriety forgotten, as she examined his injuries with a critical eye. Some men from the silver mine were saying unkind things about a certain shopkeeper in town, he replied, his eyes fixed on hers. I suggested they find another topic of conversation. Aurora's breath caught. They were talking about me. They were, unpleasantly. His jaw tightened. I don't abide men disrespecting women, especially. He trailed off. Especially what, Mr. Dawson? She prompted. Especially women I've come to admire, he finished quietly. Heat bloomed in Aurora's cheeks. She'd had admirers before Willow Creek had precious few unmarried women, but none had affected her the way this quiet cowboy did. That was gallant of you, she said, stepping back to a more proper distance. Though I hope you won't make a habit of brawling on my behalf. I make no promises, Miss O'Malley. The corner of his mouth that wasn't split curled upward. Some things are worth fighting for. After that day, something shifted between them. Their conversations lingered longer, touched on deeper subjects. Aurora learned that Kieran had been raised on a cattle ranch in Texas, had fought briefly in the war despite being barely 16, and had spent the years since moving from place to place, never settling. Don't you ever wish for a home? She asked one afternoon as they sat on the store's porch, watching a summer storm roll across the mountains. Kieran was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Sometimes, he finally said, but a man with my history doesn't have the luxury of putting down roots. What history is that? Aurora ventured, curious despite herself, his expression closed. One best left buried, Miss O'Malley. The autumn of 1876 brought early snow to the Colorado mountains. Business at the store slowed as farmers and ranchers battened down for winter. Aurora found herself alone more often, the quiet hours filled with thoughts of the mysterious cowboy who'd become a fixture in her life. On a particularly bitter November evening, as she was preparing to close, the door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and Kieran Dawson, his arms laden with firewood. Mr. Dawson, what blizzard's coming? he interrupted, depositing the wood by her stove. Peterson sent me to make sure you're prepared, said the last big snow caught your father short of wood. Aurora was touched by the thoughtfulness. Mr. Peterson has a long memory. That was 2 years ago. Man doesn't miss much. Kieran added logs to her dwindling fire, stoking it to a healthy blaze. He also suggested you might consider staying at the ranch until the storm passes. It's not proper, but it's safer than being alone in town with no neighbors about. Most of Willow Creek's residents had moved to larger homes outside town limits as prosperity from the nearby silver mine had increased. Aurora's store, with its upstairs living quarters, now stood somewhat isolated at the edge of town. I appreciate the offer, but I'll be fine, she assured him. I've weathered storms alone before. Kieran looked like he wanted to argue but merely nodded. At least let me check your supplies before I go. She allowed him to inspect her pantry and wood store, amused by his thoroughness. When he seemed satisfied, he returned to the main room where Aurora waited with a cup of hot coffee for him. Thank you, he said, accepting the drink. Snow melted in his dark hair and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. For the coffee and for humoring me. It's nice to be looked after sometimes, she admitted, sitting across from him. Since Father died, I've grown used to handling everything alone. You shouldn't have to. The words came out fiercer than either expected. Kieran looked away, clearing his throat. A woman like you deserves better. A woman like me, Aurora echoed, strong, independent, kind. His eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. Beautiful. The word hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Aurora felt her heartbeat quicken. No one had called her beautiful since her fiancé had left for the war 6 years ago and never returned. Mr. Dawson, Kieran, he interrupted softly. After all these months, I think you might call me Kieran. Kieran, she repeated, testing the intimacy of his given name. I think you should leave now before the storm worsens. Something like disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded and rose to his feet. Of course. Lock the door behind me, Aurora. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her shiver in a way the cold never could. The blizzard raged for 3 days, burying Willow Creek in 4 feet of snow. On the 4th morning, Aurora was shoveling a path from her door when the distant sound of hoofbeats reached her. Through the glare of sunlight on snow emerged a familiar figure on horseback. Kieran dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his eyes scanning her face. Are you all right? The road was impassable until today. I'm fine, she assured him, touched by his concern, just running low on coffee, which is hardly a catastrophe. Relief softened his features. I brought supplies, he said, gesturing to his saddlebags, and news the pass to Denver is blocked. The stage won't run for at least 2 weeks. This was concerning. Aurora had been counting on the stage to bring her monthly shipment of goods. That will make Christmas difficult, she murmured, thinking of the families counting on her store for holiday necessities. Peterson's sending men to clear it tomorrow, Kieran added. I volunteered to join them. That's dangerous work in this weather. Worth the risk if it means children get their Christmas. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Besides, I've survived worse than a little snow. The look they shared held something new, a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun. Aurora felt herself teetering on the edge of a precipice, drawn to this man in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. The moment broke when Kieran's horse snorted and stamped impatiently. I should go, he said reluctantly. Peterson's expecting me back. Be careful on the pass tomorrow, Aurora said as he mounted. I'd hate to have to bandage you up again. His smile turned teasing. Would you now? And here I thought that might be the perfect excuse to see you again. She shook her head at his audacity but couldn't suppress her answering smile. Goodbye, Kieran Dawson. Not goodbye, he corrected. Just until next time, Aurora O'Malley. As she watched him ride away, Aurora acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Kieran Dawson. And that frightened her more than any blizzard ever could. The men succeeded in clearing the pass, and the stage arrived in time for Christmas deliveries. Aurora's store became a flurry of activity as townsfolk purchased gifts and supplies for the holiday. In the rush, she saw little of Kieran, though she heard he'd been instrumental in the dangerous work on the mountain road. On Christmas Eve, as she was preparing to close early, the bell above her door jingled. Aurora looked up to find Kieran standing there, a small package in his gloved hands. "Merry Christmas," he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Merry Christmas," she returned, suddenly conscious of her rumpled apron and hair escaping its pins. "I thought you'd be celebrating at the Peterson Ranch. I wanted to see you first." He approached the counter, placing the package between them. "It's nothing grand, but I thought you might like it." Aurora stared at the simply wrapped gift. "I don't have anything for you." "I didn't expect anything," he assured her. "Open it." With trembling fingers, she untied the string and folded back the brown paper. Inside lay a small leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the soft leather. "I noticed your old one was nearly full," Kieran explained. "The man who made it owed me a favor. I hope it's all right." The thoughtfulness of the gift, that he had noticed such a detail about her life, touched Aurora deeply. "It's perfect, thank you." Their eyes met across the counter, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. "Would you," Aurora began, then gathered her courage. "Would you like to stay for dinner? It's nothing special, but I'd welcome the company tonight." Surprise and pleasure lit his face. "I'd be honored." That Christmas Eve marked a turning point. Over a simple meal of stew and fresh bread, they talked more openly than ever before. Aurora spoke of her childhood in St. Louis, her family's journey west after the war, and the fiancé who never returned from battle. Kieran shared stories of his years as a ranch hand, a brief stint as a marshal in a Kansas town, and his love for the open country. As the evening drew to a close, neither seemed eager for it to end. They stood at her door, the awkward tension of new possibilities stretching between them. "Thank you for tonight," Kieran said softly. "Best Christmas I've had in years." "Thank you for the journal," Aurora replied. "And the company." He hesitated, then slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Aurora." The touch of his lips lingered long after he disappeared into the snowy night. Winter gradually released its grip on Willow Creek. As the days lengthened and the snow receded, Aurora and Kieran's relationship deepened. They were never openly courting, both too private for such public declarations, but the town noticed the Cowboys' frequent presence at the general store, the way they sat together at Sunday services, and the flowers that sometimes appeared on Aurora's counter. By March, rumors circulated that the mysterious Kieran Dawson had finally found reason to put down roots. Aurora tried to ignore the whispers, uncertain of the future herself. Kieran had never spoken of permanence, and she had not asked. Their idyll shattered on a mild spring evening when Aurora was restocking shelves after hours. The door crashed open and 3 men stormed in, their faces hard beneath their hats, guns drawn. "Where is he?" demanded the leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his jaw. Aurora's blood ran cold. "The store is closed, gentlemen." "Don't play dumb, lady," the scarred man growled, advancing. "We know Dawson's been hanging around here. Where is he?" Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. These were men from Kieran's mysterious past, the past he refused to discuss. "I don't know where Mr. Dawson is," she answered honestly, her hand inching toward the rifle beneath the counter. The scarred man noticed the movement and lunged, seizing her wrist in a painful grip. "You're coming with us. Dawson's got a soft spot for you. He'll show himself if we've got you." "Let her go, Maddox." The voice from the doorway was calm, deadly. Kieran stood silhouetted against the twilight, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. "Well, well," the man called Maddox smirked, keeping his grip on Aurora. "If it isn't the famous Kieran Dawson, you're getting sloppy, settling down, playing shopkeeper's sweetheart." "This is between us," Kieran said, his gaze flicking briefly to Aurora. "Let her go and we'll settle it like men." Maddox laughed, an ugly sound. "Like you settled things with my brother. A bullet in the back isn't exactly honorable." Aurora Aurora felt sick. She had never wanted to believe the rumors that Kieran had once been a hired gun. "Your brother drew first," Kieran replied evenly. "And he was facing me when he fell, you know that." "What I know," Maddox snarled, "is that you're going to pay. 3 years I've been tracking you, Dawson. 3 years." Events unfolded with lightning speed. Maddox shoved Aurora toward one of his companions and went for his gun. Kieran drew faster, his shot catching Maddox in the shoulder. The second man lunged for Aurora, but she was already dropping to the floor, pulling the rifle from its hiding place. Gunfire exploded in the small store. Aurora fired at the man reaching for her, catching him in the leg. Kieran exchanged shots with the third man, both finding cover behind overturned furniture. When the smoke cleared, Maddox and his men were wounded but alive. Kieran stood unharmed, his expression grim as he collected their weapons. "Get out," he ordered, his voice like ice. "Get out and don't come back. Next time I won't aim to wound." The men staggered out, supporting each other, cursing as they went. When they were gone, Kieran turned to Aurora, his eyes filled with a terrible resignation. "Are you hurt?" he asked, not approaching her. She shook her head, still gripping the rifle. "Who were they?" "Men from my past, the past I didn't want to touch you." He holstered his gun with practiced ease. "I'm sorry, Aurora, I should never have stayed in Willow Creek. Were you a gunfighter?" she asked, needing to hear the truth. Kieran's silence was answer enough. "I see." Aurora lowered the rifle, suddenly exhausted. "You never told me. Would it have mattered?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Would you have looked at me the same way if you'd known I've killed men for money?" "I deserved the choice," she replied, anger finally breaking through her shock. "I deserved to know who I was falling in love with." The words hung between them, the first acknowledgement of feelings they'd both carefully avoided naming. Kieran's expression softened. "Aurora, don't." She turned away, fighting tears. "Just go, Kieran. I think you should go now." He hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll be gone by morning. You won't have to worry about men like Maddox coming after me again." The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. Aurora surveyed her shattered store, bullet holes in the walls, merchandise strewn across the floor. It seemed a fitting metaphor for her heart. The next morning, true to his word, Kieran Dawson was gone from Willow Creek. Mr. Peterson reported that the Cowboy had collected his pay and ridden out before dawn, heading west toward the territories. Aurora received the news with a composed face but a breaking heart. Spring turned to summer, and Aurora threw herself into her work, expanding the store's inventory, repainting the exterior, and adding a small lending library at the urging of the town schoolteacher. If the townsfolk noticed that her smile rarely reached her eyes these days, they were kind enough not to mention it. In August, a letter arrived from Denver. Aurora opened it with idle curiosity, then froze as she read the contents. An attorney was seeking to contact her regarding an inheritance. Her mother's brother, whom she'd thought long dead, had passed away in San Francisco, leaving her a considerable sum. To claim it, she would need to travel to Denver to sign the necessary papers. After arranging for the schoolteacher's sister to watch the store, Aurora boarded the stage to Denver. The city was a shock after the quiet of Willow Creek, noisy, crowded, vibrant with life and commerce. She found the attorney's office easily enough and spent an hour signing documents and learning about an uncle she barely remembered. With business concluded and an unexpected inheritance soon to be hers, Aurora decided to stay an extra day in Denver. She purchased new dresses, books, and supplies for the store, enjoying the novelty of city shops. As evening fell, she found herself drawn to the sound of piano music drifting from a respectable-looking hotel. The hotel restaurant was busy, but not crowded. Aurora secured a table near the window and ordered dinner, content to listen to the skilled pianist while she ate. She was halfway through her meal when a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. A tall man in dusty trail clothes had entered, causing the maitre d' to hurry over with obvious concern. The man turned to answer the staff member, and Aurora's fork clattered to her plate. Kieran. He hadn't seen her yet, focused on persuading the reluctant maitre d' to seat him despite his unsuitable attire. Aurora watched, frozen with indecision. Should she hide, approach him, pretend not to see him? Before she could decide, Kieran glanced around the room and his eyes locked with hers. Time seemed to stop as recognition, shock, and something like longing crossed his face. He said something to the maitre d' and then walked straight to her table. "Aurora," he said, her name a quiet reverence on his lips. "Kieran." She was proud that her voice remained steady. "This is unexpected." "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. She should refuse. She should protect her mending heart and send him away. "Yes," she said instead. He sat, removing his hat, looking so familiar yet somehow changed. There were new lines around his eyes, a weariness in his posture that hadn't been there before. "You look well," he offered, his gaze taking in her new dress, her carefully styled hair. "Thank you." Aurora found herself at a loss for words. After months of imagining what she would say if she ever saw him again, her mind was blank. "What brings you to Denver?" "Work," he replied vaguely. "I've been guiding hunting parties in the mountains, just finished a 2-week expedition with some Easterners." "And now," he shrugged. "Haven't decided, maybe California." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. "How is Willow Creek?" Kieran finally asked, growing. She answered, "The mine's doing well. They're talking about bringing the railroad through next year, and your store, also doing well. I've added a lending library." She paused. "I'm here about an inheritance, actually. My uncle passed away and left me his estate." Kieran nodded, genuine pleasure warming his eyes. "I'm glad for you, Aurora. You deserve good fortune." The conversation faltered again. Around them, diners chatted, the pianist played, and the world continued, oblivious to the storm of emotions at their small table. "Why did you leave like that?" Aurora finally asked, the question that had haunted her for months. Without even saying goodbye, pain flickered across Kieran's face. "You asked me to go. I asked you to go that night, not to vanish from my life completely," she countered, keeping her voice low. 3 months, Kieran, not a word, not a letter. "What would I have said?" he asked quietly. "That I'm a former gun for hire with men still hunting me. That I fell in love with you the moment you bandaged my side and looked at me without fear. That I'm not the kind of man who gets to have a normal life with a woman like you." The raw honesty of his words stole her breath. "You might have given me the chance to decide that for myself." Kieran looked away, his jaw tight. "I saw the way you looked at me after Maddox revealed who I really am. I couldn't bear to see that look every day knowing what I am disgusted you." "I wasn't disgusted," Aurora corrected him. "I was hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth." "The truth is ugly, Aurora. So is lying to someone you claim to love." His eyes snapped back to hers. "I never lied about loving you." The tension between them had drawn attention from nearby tables. Aurora stood abruptly. "I think we should continue this conversation elsewhere." Kieran followed her out of the restaurant and through the hotel lobby to a small garden courtyard, mercifully empty in the evening air. When they were alone, Aurora turned to face him. "Tell me everything," she demanded. "No more secrets, Kieran. I deserve the whole truth." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "You do." As twilight deepened around them, Kieran Dawson finally revealed his past. He spoke of a young man driven by poverty and anger after the war, who discovered he had a talent for violence. Of years spent as a gun for hire until a job went wrong and he killed a man whose only crime was being in the wrong place. Of his decision that day to change his life, to become someone different, and the men like Maddox who wouldn't let him escape his reputation. "I've been running for 5 years, he concluded. "Willow Creek was just supposed to be another stop along the way, then I met you." Aurora absorbed his words, her heart aching for the lost young man he had been and the tormented man he'd become. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I'm still running," he admitted. "But every day I think about turning around, about coming back to you." "Why don't you?" Kieran's laugh was hollow. "Because men like me don't get second chances with women like you." Aurora stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. What if the woman disagrees? Hope and fear warred in his expression. "Aurora, you don't know what you're saying. My past will always be there, always a threat." "I'm not afraid of your past," she said firmly. "I'm afraid of a future without you in it." He reached for her then, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. "I love you," he said simply. "I have from the start, but loving you means wanting better for you than a life on the run. And if I told you, I don't want to run anymore either." Aurora covered his hand with hers. "My inheritance, it's substantial, enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knows either of us." Kieran's eyes widened. "You would do that, leave everything you've built in Willow Creek. The store is just a building. Willow Creek is just a place." Aurora took a deep breath, committing to the idea even as she spoke it. "Home is wherever you are, Kieran. It took losing you to understand that." For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then he pulled her to him, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not," she agreed, smiling against his shoulder. "But you have me anyway." In the privacy of the hotel garden, with stars emerging above them, Kieran kissed her for the first time, a kiss that held promise and passion and the sweet relief of coming home. They were married 3 days later in Denver, a simple ceremony with only the necessary witnesses present. Aurora sent word to Willow Creek that she would be selling the store and not returning, a decision that caused much speculation but ultimately little surprise among the townsfolk who had watched her grief after Kieran's departure. With her inheritance and the proceeds from the store sale, they purchased a small ranch in Northern California, far from Kieran's past and close enough to the growing city of San Francisco for occasional visits. They built a life there, raising horses and eventually 3 children who grew up knowing their father as a quiet, honorable man with skilled hands and a gentle heart. There were difficult moments, nightmares that woke Kieran shouting, occasional strangers asking too many questions about his past, but they weathered them together. The years softened the harder edges of their story, turning pain into wisdom, regret into gratitude for second chances. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset paint the hills gold, Aurora turned to her husband. "Why did you really come back?" she asked suddenly. "That first time in Willow Creek after you were wounded. You said you'd left town, but you came back 3 days later." Kieran smiled, the smile of a man at peace with himself and his place in the world. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm before answering. "I tried to leave," he admitted. "Rode south like I told you. But something kept pulling me back north again. I couldn't explain it then." He looked at her, the love of a decade evident in his eyes. "Now I'd call it destiny." Aurora laughed softly. "Destiny, that's rather poetic for a hardened cowboy." "I've learned a thing or two about poetry since meeting you," he teased, pulling her closer. They sat in companionable silence as the light faded, content in the life they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Kieran asked eventually. "Leaving everything behind for me?" Aurora shook her head, certain in her answer. "Never, not once." "Why?" he pressed, a hint of his old insecurity surfacing. "Why do you keep choosing me after everything?" Aurora turned to him, cupping his beloved face in her hands. "Why do you keep coming back?" She asked softly, echoing the question she'd posed during those uncertain early days. The cowboy smiled, the lines at his eyes crinkling with happiness. "Because my heart never left," he answered, just as he had all those years ago. "Not for a single moment." Their lips met in a kiss that held the sweetness of their beginning and the depth of their journey together, a kiss that promised many more years of a love that had defied the odds and transformed them both. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, watching stars appear over the California hills. 2 people who had found in each other not just love but redemption, not just passion but peace. In a world that had shown them both its cruelest edges, they had carved out a haven of tenderness and trust, proving that even the most wounded hearts can heal when given the chance to love and be loved in return. In the spring of their 15th year together, as wildflowers carpeted the rolling hills surrounding their ranch, Aurora and Kieran welcomed visitors from Willow Creek, the schoolteacher and her husband, who had purchased Aurora's store and turned it into a thriving business. They brought news of the town, now connected to Denver by railroad and growing rapidly with the continued success of the silver mine. "Do you miss it?" the schoolteacher asked Aurora as they walked together through the garden Aurora had lovingly cultivated. "Willow Creek, I mean." Aurora considered the question, her eyes drifting to where Kieran stood with the schoolteacher's husband, showing him the improvements they'd made to the barn. At 43, Kieran's dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, his face more weathered, but he moved with the same easy grace that had first caught her attention all those years ago. "I miss certain moments," Aurora admitted. "But not enough to wish for a different life than the one I have." That evening, after their guests had retired to the guest room, Aurora found Kieran on their porch, a familiar posture from countless nights over their years together. "They asked if we'd ever consider moving back," she said, settling beside him on the swing he'd built when she was expecting their first child. "Now that the town has changed so much." Kieran's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. "And what did you say?" "That this is our home." She rested her head against his shoulder. "That we built it together and it's where we belong." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "No regrets then?" It was a question he still asked occasionally, as if reassuring himself that their life together was real. Aurora had long ago learned to answer not with irritation at his lingering doubts, but with the absolute certainty of her love. "The only thing I regret," she said, smiling up at him, "is that it took a bullet wound to bring you into my store that first day." Kieran chuckled, the sound rich and warm in the gathering darkness. "I'd have found my way there eventually. Some things are meant to be, bullet or no bullet." "Is that what we were, meant to be?" His expression turned thoughtful. "I never believed in fate before you. Thought a man made his own way, good or bad." He traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "But how else do you explain it? Out of all the towns in the West, I rode into yours. Out of all the people who might have been behind that counter, it was you." Aurora smiled at his uncharacteristic philosophizing. "Perhaps we were just lucky." "More than lucky," he corrected. "Blessed." They fell silent, listening to the night sounds of their land, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the pines, the occasional call of an owl. Their 3 children slept soundly inside, the eldest now nearly 14 and showing signs of his father's quiet strength and his mother's determined spirit. "You remember what you said to me that night in Denver?" Aurora asked suddenly. "When I asked why you kept coming back." Kieran smiled, the memory clear despite the passing years. "I said my heart never left." "Is that still true? After all this time, all the challenges?" He turned to her fully, his gaze steady and clear in the moonlight filtering through the porch railings. "Aurora O'Malley Dawson," he said, his voice low and fervent, "my heart has been yours since the moment you pointed that Winchester at me and still decided to help a bleeding stranger. It will be yours until the day I die, and likely beyond that, if such things are possible." Aurora felt the same flutter in her chest that his presence had always caused, even after 15 years of marriage. "How did I get so fortunate," she wondered aloud, "to find a poet disguised as a cowboy?" "Not a poet," he corrected with a self-deprecating smile. "Just a man who found everything he never knew he was looking for in a green-eyed shopkeeper with more courage than sense." "Courage, is it? I seem to recall you calling it foolishness when I insisted on bandaging your side that night." "The wisest foolishness I've ever encountered," he conceded, pulling her closer for a kiss that still held the power to make her breath catch. As they sat together, watching moonlight silver the land they'd made their own, Aurora reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a bullet-scarred introduction to a love that had healed wounds far deeper than flesh, they had forged a bond that neither Kieran's past nor life's inevitable hardships had managed to break. The legacy of their love extended beyond themselves to their children, who grew up knowing that redemption was possible. To their community, where Kieran's skilled hands and fair dealings had earned him respect regardless of what rumors occasionally surfaced about his earlier life. And to each other, as they continued to discover new depths to their connection with each passing year. "I love you," Aurora whispered, the words no less meaningful for having been said countless times before. "Every day in new ways, I find myself loving you more." Kieran's arm tightened around her, his response a gentle kiss pressed to her temple, a gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. As stars wheeled overhead and night deepened around their home, Aurora knew with absolute certainty that the choice she had made in that Denver garden 15 years ago had been the right one. Loving Kieran Dawson with all his complexities and contradictions had not been the safe choice, but it had been the only choice her heart would allow. And every day since, through joy and sorrow, through the raising of children and the building of a life, that choice had been affirmed. In the quiet moments and the chaotic ones, in the ordinary days and the extraordinary, the truth remained constant. Their hearts had recognized each other from the beginning, and in finding each other, they had both finally found home. The years continued to pass, seasons flowing one into the next, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Their eldest son left for college in San Francisco, returning for holidays with stories of a world changing faster than they could imagine. Their daughter, middle child and fierce protector of all creatures, became the local veterinarian after studying in Sacramento. Their youngest son stayed closest to home, showing Kieran's affinity for horses and Aurora's head for business as he helped expand their breeding operation. On the morning of their 30th anniversary, Aurora awoke to find Kieran's side of the bed empty. This wasn't unusual. He still rose with the sun most days, a habit from his years on the trail that never quite left him. She dressed and made her way downstairs, expecting to find him at the kitchen table with his coffee and the newspaper that now arrived daily from the nearby town. Instead, she found a note in his familiar handwriting. "Meet me where it all began." Aurora smiled, puzzled but intrigued. Where it all began, they had met in her store in Willow Creek, hundreds of miles away. They had married in Denver, also impossible to reach in a morning. Their life together had truly begun on this very ranch. She stepped onto the porch, scanning the property for signs of her husband. Her gaze caught on movement near the old oak tree at the edge of their front pasture, the tree under which they had picnicked on their first day as owners of this land, where Kieran had promised to build her a home worthy of her trust in him. As she approached, she saw that he had spread a blanket beneath the now massive oak, its branches providing dappled shade against the morning sun. A basket sat on the blanket, and beside it, Kieran waited, looking as nervous as she had ever seen him. "Good morning," she called as she drew near. "What's all this?" Kieran stood, his hair now more silver than dark, his face lined with years of sun and laughter, but his eyes still the same stormy gray that had captured her heart so long ago. "Happy anniversary," he said, taking her hands in his. 30 years. 30 years, she echoed, amazed at how the time had passed in what felt like both an instant and a lifetime. "So this is where it all began," he nodded, gesturing for her to sit on the blanket. "This is where our life together truly started. Right here under this tree when you looked at this empty land and somehow saw a future I couldn't even imagine." Aurora settled beside him, touched by his sentimentality. Kieran had grown more demonstrative over the years, but grand gestures were still rare from her practical husband. He opened the basket, revealing fresh biscuits, jam, fruit, and 2 cups of still steaming coffee. "I thought we might have breakfast here like we did that first morning. You remember that?" she asked, surprised. It had been a simple meal, hastily packed before they left the hotel in the nearby town to view their new property for the first time. "I remember everything about that day," he assured her. "The way the sun caught in your hair as you walked this land. The way you immediately started planning where the house should stand for the best view of the hills. The look on your face when I promised to build you a home here." Aurora felt tears prick her eyes at the tenderness in his voice. "You kept that promise beautifully," she said, glancing toward their sprawling ranch house, built by Kieran's hands with help from neighbors and expanded over the years as their family grew. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the morning peace and each other's company. When they had finished, Kieran reached into the basket one more time and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers and vines. "I made this for you," he said, placing it in her hands. Aurora examined the box, marveling at the detailed craftsmanship. Kieran had always been skilled with his hands, but this was exceptional work. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the polished wood. "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. Aurora lifted it carefully, opening the small clasp to find a miniature photograph of them on their wedding day on one side and a recent family portrait on the other. "Kieran," she whispered, overcome with emotion. "Turn it over," he instructed softly. Engraved on the back of the locket were the words that had defined their journey. "Because my heart never left." Aurora looked up to find Kieran watching her with the same intensity he had shown in that Denver hotel so many years ago, as if memorizing every detail of her face. "30 years ago, you changed my life," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You gave a man who didn't deserve redemption a chance to become someone worthy of you. Every day since, I've tried to be that man." Aurora reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You've succeeded, my love, 1,000 times over. There's something else I want to give you," Kieran continued, sudden nervousness returning to his expression. "Something I should have done years ago. What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I want to renew our vows, here on our land with our children and friends around us, a proper celebration this time, not the hurried ceremony we had in Denver." Aurora felt a smile bloom across her face. Their wedding had been necessarily simple, a quick exchange of vows before a judge with only strangers as witnesses, followed by immediate departure to begin their new life away from the shadows of Kieran's past. "You want a wedding?" she asked, delighted by this unexpected wish from her pragmatic husband. "I want to stand before everyone we love and promise myself to you again," he corrected. "To show the world that the best decision I ever made was loving you, and to celebrate that we've built a life good enough to share." Tears spilled onto Aurora's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Oh, yes." 2 months later, beneath that same oak tree, Aurora and Kieran renewed their vows, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the friends they had made over 3 decades in California. Their daughter had woven wildflowers into Aurora's silver-streaked auburn hair, and their sons stood proud beside their father as he once again promised his heart and life to the woman who had saved him in every way a person can be saved. As the celebration continued into evening, with music and dancing on the wide lawn before their home, Kieran drew Aurora away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the garden she had tended for so many years. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist, holding her close. "Completely," she assured him, resting against his solid strength. "Are you? More than I ever thought possible." He looked out over the gathering, their eldest son dancing with his wife, their daughter laughing with neighbors, their youngest chasing his toddler daughter through the lantern-lit yard. "We built something good here, Aurora." "We did," she agreed. "Something beautiful." They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the scene before them, the tangible evidence of their shared life, the legacy of love they had created together. "You know," Aurora said thoughtfully, "if you hadn't been shot that night in Willow Creek, if you hadn't stumbled into my store needing bandages and whiskey, none of this would exist." Kieran chuckled. "I've often thought the same. Perhaps I should send Maddox a thank-you note." "Let's not go that far," she replied with a laugh. Then, more seriously, "Do you ever wonder what happened to him, to the men who were hunting you?" "Sometimes," Kieran admitted. "But it's been so long now. Maddox would be an old man if he's still alive. His vendetta can't have sustained him all these years." Aurora nodded, accepting this. They had been cautious in their early years together, but as decades passed with no sign of threats from Kieran's past, that vigilance had gradually eased. Their life had become ordinary in the best possible way, filled with the everyday joys and struggles of family, work, community. "Dance with me," Kieran requested, as the musicians began a slow, melodic tune. Aurora smiled up at her husband, seeing beyond the weathered face to the young cowboy who had captured her heart so long ago. "Always," she answered, stepping into his arms. As they moved together under the stars, surrounded by the life they had created, Aurora felt a profound sense of completion. The journey had not always been easy, but every step had brought them here to this moment of perfect contentment, to the fulfillment of hopes neither had dared to voice in those uncertain early days. I love you, Kieran murmured against her temple, words spoken so often over 30 years that they had become as natural as breathing, yet never taken for granted. Today, tomorrow, always. Aurora tightened her arms around him, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart against hers. And I love you, she whispered back. My cowboy, my heart, my home. Around them, lanterns glowed in the gathering darkness. Music drifted on the evening breeze, and their family and friends celebrated the enduring love that had begun with a wounded stranger and a brave shopkeeper in a small Colorado town 30 years before. Their story, once marked by separation, doubt, and danger, had transformed into one of belonging, certainty, and peace. In each other's arms, Aurora and Kieran had found not just love but sanctuary, not just passion but purpose. Their hearts, once guarded and scarred by life's hardships, had found in each other the safety to heal, to grow, and to flourish. And as they danced beneath the vast California sky, stars bearing witness to their continued journey together, both knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventure of their lives had been finding their way to each other and choosing, every day since, to stay.